Yeah, that is a quandary. I think basically a sense of happiness is, so I think it's composed of a number of things. And one is a kind of contentedness, but not contentedness to the extent of, certainly not boredom. I wouldn't equate boredom and contentedness to begin with, but I think
Mhm.
sometimes people think that, well, the more content they are, then the more boring their life must be. But I think contentedness can include a sense of adventure, for example. It can include a sense of productivity. Um, and in addition to contentedness, the uh, I think a sense of belonging is part of that whole formula for happiness, and just balance and harmony in general, I think, is really important. And when we think about balance and harmony in general, I'm not necessarily saying a kind of static condition in which everything is equal, but
Right.
in which there's a kind of a nice flow of different things going on in a person's life, and some variety. I think the philosopher John Stuart Mill talked about the importance of variety in happiness, and he talked about it as being, that we can enjoy many and varied things, um, neither too much nor too little. Essentially, was his idea that our enjoyment of each of those things would be neither too much nor too little. So, so I just those are some of my initial thoughts about this complex idea of what happiness is.
Yeah, and I don't know. I feel like also one of the things that folks kind of relate happiness with contentedness incorrectly is that idea of being content in the moment or being happy in the moment versus happiness being something that we can kind of impose on in a later date or a way that we reframe things because one of the examples I always give is that let's say you go camping for a weekend and it's really raining and it's just nasty. In the moment you are probably not very content and you're not very happy, but when you reframe things later on, you're able to kind of project that meaning onto it and find that sense of happiness later on. So, I mean, I feel like a lot of times people miss or I don't want to say they misdefine it, but people don't people equate happiness in the moment to being content in the moment. And I don't think that's really a good correlation.
Yeah, I agree with you. And another thing that I would pick up on there, I think that you were getting at, is that that our state of happiness in response to a given set of circumstances can change with time. And we can look back on something in hindsight and feel happy about it now, while at the time we didn't necessarily feel so happy about it. And I think the same thing goes for contentedness. Um, that sometimes if you go through something that's a really difficult life experience, and you think it's horrible, but then years later you come to appreciate the wonderful lessons that you've learned from it, and maybe the ways you've grown from it, and the doors of possibility that it has opened up in your life, and it brings on a kind of happiness to think back on that experience. I can give a perfect example from my own life.
Mhm.
um, there was a period in my life when I was an electrician, and I had dropped out of college, and this was the way I was going to make my living. But I was really unhappy being an electrician. It was something that I could do, I could make a living at, but boy, I'll tell you, there wasn't much contentment in that occupation for me. It just wasn't. It just wasn't right for me in many ways. And then I had a back injury on the job that put me in the hospital, and I had to have surgery. And coming out of that gave me an opportunity to redirect my life. And I got support from the state because it had been an on-the-job injury.
Mhm.
And I got career counseling and was able to go back to college. And I now look back on that back injury with a sense of happiness and contentedness because I see it as a course correction that allowed me a path out of a really unhappy moment in my life and into a much better set of circumstances, a more uh, full expression of what I have to offer in the world and the kinds of things that I find important to be able to participate in those. So that's just one example of how our perspective on happiness relevant to one thing or another can really change.
Yeah, I mean, feel that just kind of going off what you're saying, and I want to thank you for sharing that personal example, because I feel like a lot of people in their lives feel exactly the way that you felt, right? They may not have responded to the circumstances in their life the way they wanted to initially, and they find themselves, kind of trapped in I don't want to say a predestined course they've selected for themselves, because anybody
Hmm.
can quit their job, but they find themselves kind of trapped by their circumstances. And
Yes.
a lot of people just don't have that opportunity to kind of get that kick in the ass to try and redefine their experience.
Right.
So I'm guessing, if people don't have that opportunity, how can I guess how can we kind of reframe our current circumstances to try and help us empower? Because we've been talking about, reframing stuff maybe years after the fact, when we kind of grown and, reinterpreted these situations. But, I guess how do we cope with these circumstances while they're happening?
Well, I think before I start talking about happiness in that, one of the things that I want to acknowledge is that sometimes people can be in such difficult situations and circumstances in their life that any kind of advice that I might give about reframing and being able to have a different perspective on what's going on can sound, practically insulting
Right.
to some people when they're in those moments. And so, and goodness, I've been in those moments myself, and so I know what that's like. And so, the kind of the thoughts that I want to give in reflection on your question, I, I want to give without minimizing just how negative and stuck people can feel where they are, because circumstances sometimes can make it seem like, well, I just don't have any choice. I look at all my options, and this is kind of the lesser of all the evils that are out there for me to choose, and so I'm just going to go with this and put up with it. I mean, that's kind of the way I felt when I was an electrician, by
Right.
the way. um, but one of the things I think is important to realize is that there really is always choice involved, and even if it's the lesser of undesired circumstances, I'm still making that choice. I'm still saying yes to this less desirable thing than something that I might be able to dream up. Um, but also yes to this in comparison to many other options that I know that I have that would not be nearly as desirable. So I think that keeping that in mind is always an important part of our experience of life. There's a uh, that's an acknowledgement of our existential freedom and our existential responsibility, that you know that we are our own decision makers, and of course we are deeply influenced by lots of different factors. I mean, to a great degree, most of us don't appreciate just how programmed and conditioned we are to think and behave in certain ways.
Right.
And And so I think one of the things here that this starts to get at when we start talking about choice and we start talking about our existential freedom and responsibility is that we have to start practicing some really deep self awareness to become aware not only of what our choices are, but why we find some choices more acceptable than others, or more desirable, more attractive than others, and why some we just write off without even thinking about it. Because when we start to do that kind of self-examination, we have the opportunity to begin to question, okay, where did I pick that up from? Why do I think that that's not a good option for me or an acceptable option? Or why do I think that this other thing over here is the thing that I have to do? And and a lot of us don't really deeply get into those things. We kind of settle for a lot of the answers that we've been given and the expectations of the people that we consider to kind of be our tribe in life,
Hmm.
and we really don't embrace our existential freedom and responsibility, and that's often what keeps us in that situation of and those feelings of being stuck at one point.